Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here, to be asked to present on World Wildlife Day to a screening of One Planet, Our Planet. And it's also an honor to feature at this event with my old friend Bertrand van Arx. I should say at the beginning, I've seen Our Planet, One Planet, and it's very, very difficult to compete with the wealth of information and the superb photography that's in that broadcast. And I'm not even going to try, but a few pointers, partly personal reflections and partly WWF reflections, so to speak, would probably help. And maybe you might be able to keep these in your mind as you watch the series, which can explain the problems much, much better than I can. Now, first of all, I show a picture of a panda. Naturally, being WWF, I show a picture of a panda, but it's not for branding purposes. It's because when we talk about conservation and successes and failures, the panda is one of our spectacular successes. It has almost doubled its numbers in the last decade, from 1,000 to 1,900. It has been downgraded in terms of threat status by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. And there are a number of factors that contributed to this, but which we will discuss again. But it's largely because China, which hosts the entire global population, obviously, made this a point of pride and an icon for its conservation credentials, and put a lot of effort into making it a success. And we'll discuss some of these factors as we go on. By contrast, this is an oceanic white-tipped shark. And whereas the panda was always a sort of a niche endemic that was confined to a relatively small part of the world, so historically it was never a widespread species, but this used to be one of the commonest species of shark, and now it's critically endangered. And it was listed as being critically endangered even after when in 2013, it was listed on Appendix 2 of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species because of the trade in its fins. And there are a number of factors, again, that have contributed to this disappointing and alarming situation. Because quite often it's caught as bycatch, but the fins are retained anyway. So it's not, although it's described as bycatch, it's really a secondary target in tuna fisheries. But overall, when you're dealing with wide-ranging species that occur right around the globe, like sharks, it's much, much more difficult to harness the kind of political will that's necessary to do something about them compared to a species that's confined to one country. Moving on from species to places, this is Virunga National Park, the oldest national park in Africa, an absolutely superb place, famous not just for its elephants and its gorillas, but also for its volcanoes and its landscape beauty. Now, a few years ago, WWF, along with others, was successful in persuading two oil companies to forego oil and gas exploration in the park, which we considered a major success. The park, I should also say, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and UNESCO, and of course the park leader, the park director himself, Monsieur Emmanuel de Merode, deserve a huge part of the credit, but we in WWF played a part. But this is something that illustrates another issue with nature conservation, that you can never walk away and say, that's done, that problem is solved. Virunga is in quite a remote part of DRC, far, far away from the capital. And DRC is one of the biggest countries in Africa. And really, there are huge political and governance problems. And so there are still issues with poaching in the park, with violence towards rangers, even with violence towards tourists. So Virunga will probably never come off the list of patients that require constant medical surveillance and attention. Here is another picture representing an alarming situation in another World Heritage Site, the rainforests of the Atsinanana in Madagascar. And among the many beauties and wonders of this site, including its own species of lemur, the silky safika, this place is noted for its wealth of precious timbers, ebonies and rosewoods and palisanders. And although those timbers have species around the world, many of the species in Madagascar are endemic. And there's been a huge crisis for the last 10 years of illegal logging in this site. It has subsided somewhat now, but that's only because most of the really valuable large trees are gone, and also because there are still accumulated stockpiles that traffickers are looking to smuggle out of the country. And here, like in DRC, a lot of the issues revolve around governance, around lack of resources, lack of capacity, poverty. And there are many sites like this that we could point to. Sumatra, the rainforests of Sumatra are also World Heritage Site, would be another example. So what are the things that make for success or failure? Well, one of the things that we discussed in China is political will. China made it a political priority to conserve the panda. And lack of political will, by contrast, in countries like Madagascar and DRC, is definitely an important factor. And incidentally, one of the things that China did in terms of expressing their political will was they ensured that the rangers in the park are well looked after, have good working conditions, have comfortable accommodation with access to television and running water and so on. We've done surveys of ranger welfare around the world, and we can almost say that that kind of situation that pertains in the parks in Sichuan and elsewhere where the pandas are found is more the exception than the rule. In many, many parts of the world, rangers are underpaid, paid late, not adequately equipped, not properly shod, don't have communications equipment, don't have a dry place to sleep, don't have access to running water, and certainly don't have satellite television. Another issue, particularly in Madagascar and also to some extent in countries like Indonesia, obviously of which Sumatra is a part, and DRC, and many, many other countries around the world, is corruption. And this slide is actually from a WWF initiative, from a brochure for a WWF initiative that's called Targeting Natural Resource Corruption. And it's important to say that corruption isn't unique to these countries and solely the fault of these countries that score low in Transparency International ratings. Everybody around the world plays a part in making the world's most corrupt places how they are, because it's often corporate interests and so on. And we don't know that corporate interests were engaged in corrupt practices in relation to Virunga National Park, for example, but there is prima facie evidence to suggest that, and there's also prima facie evidence of corruption in relation to the illegal logging in Madagascar. So, coming back to successes, well, an important factor in successes is partnerships. As I said in relation to Virunga, we were only one piece of the puzzle. Really, addressing conservation requires a whole of society approach. Everybody has a part to play. Individuals have a part to play as consumers. The humanitarian organizations have a part to play, just as we have a part to play in their work, because conservation is for the good of our planet and for the good of its people, and especially for the good of the marginalized communities that often share their living space with animals like the ones in this picture. Another issue to address that I've just touched on is consumption. Now, hopefully this year, it was to have been last year, all the world's countries will come together to work out a new blueprint for conserving biodiversity for at least the next 10 years and probably for the next 30. And one of the things that we're trying to do as WWF is to put the discussions around footprint and consumption in the center of those discussions, which is not where they are at the moment. And that includes issues like food production and food consumption, but many other issues too: energy, steel, cement, many. And this consumption causes direct loss of wildlife because of habitat conversion and so on. It also facilitates climate change, which is bad for wildlife. But there's also indirect effects, I beg your pardon, from pollution and others are the ills that come with overconsumption. So this is really something that we all have to address. And it's not enough. We may ask, what can we do as individuals? Well, certainly the first answer is to educate yourself about your footprint. But this is something that does require government and international intervention, because governments have access to the information that can produce a regulatory regime that will address this. It's much more difficult for individual consumers to make the choices. And what we're trying to achieve out of all of this is a situation where we've actually improved the biodiversity of the planet by 2030. If we look back at the previous blueprints, the first in 2002 aimed to slow the rate of loss of biodiversity, which was a very unambitious aim, and it failed to achieve that. The next one at Aichi in 2010 was somewhat more ambitious, but didn't meet its targets. And we can only really succeed if we move away from the mentality where we just want to preserve what's left. We want to restore habitats. We want to increase the population of these endangered species. We have to be more ambitious. And if we don't set out to be more ambitious, we will ultimately fail. Now, some of us sometimes have friends or colleagues that watch our behavior and tell us we might need to do more exercise or eat less fat or something, and we might be slower to take that advice from a friend or colleague, but when your doctor tells you, then you do have to take it more seriously. And this is one of the most distinguished doctors in the world, Dr. Michael Ryan, the Director of Emergencies at the World Health Organization, a compatriot of mine, I'm proud to say. And so if you want to hear the advice for the future, take it from your doctor's lips, not from mine. This is what he said in a recent interview. Some of it. He said, we're pushing nature to its limits. We're pushing communities to their limits. We're stressing the environment and creating the conditions in which epidemics flourish. We're writing checks that we cannot cash as civilization, and they're going to bounce. And our children are going to pay that price. Someday when we're not here, they will wake up in a world where there is a pandemic that has a much higher case fatality rate and that could bring our civilization to its very knees. We need a world that is more sustainable, where profit is not put before communities, where slavery to economic growth is taken out of the equation. We need sustainable growth in our communities, sustainable livelihoods for our people. And we're taking massive risks with our future if we don't manage the planet in which we live. And we're being extremely irresponsible right now. Now, Dr. Ryan made these comments in the context where the overwhelming scientific consensus is that loss of biodiversity led directly or indirectly to the COVID pandemic that we're experiencing now, through fragmentation of habitats, opening up what were virgin areas that harbor new zoonoses, through intensive farming that allows the rapid spread of zoonotic diseases, and through wildlife trade, and through generally bad and unhygienic husbandry and bad husbandry practices in the wildlife and meat trade. And so the pandemic should really make us take stock and make us realize the urgency of our situation. So I hope you bear these points in mind as you watch the presentation. I wish you all a very pleasant evening enjoy the presentation, and please do reflect on what you see, and please enjoy the second presentation as well, and enjoy my friend Bertrand's few words beforehand. Thank you all very much. Stay well and stay safe.